On today's episode of Locked On Fantasy Basketball, we're going to be looking at the Oklahoma City Thunder and the Houston Rockets as we get ready for the NBA's restart down in Orlando. Michael Bolton.
Let's get to it.
Let's get to it, indeed.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily fantasy basketball podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd and I am the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com and at Yahoo Sports Australia. And you can find me on Twitter as always at redrock_Beeble and on Instagram at Locked On Fantasy Basketball. As I said, we're looking at the Thunder. We're looking at the Rockets today, talking about the fantasy value of these guys in the restart and how they're going to be approaching these 8 regular season games. To talk about the Oklahoma City Thunder, I'm joined by the host of the Locked On Thunder podcast. Rylan Stiles is here with me. Rylan, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
All right, so this Oklahoma City Thunder team, sitting in the playoffs, obviously qualified for the playoffs here. But what is their motivation in these 8 regular season games where before the playoffs, they can move a little bit? Are they going to be pushing it hard? Are they going to be resting the older players, the Chris Pauls, Danilo Gallinari's? Do they really care what seed they are? What are we looking at here from Billy Donovan and this team?
Well, this Thunder team is an interesting one. Coming into the season, I think no one had them in the postseason. ESPN gave them a 0.2% chance to make it. And for this rotation in the 8 seeding games, there's still a ton of room for them to move both up and down. But I think the most important part, the thing that Billy Donovan will look at the most is getting these guys in game shape, and whatever happens on that scoreboard happens, because I think that they do feel confident about the possible matchups with the Rockets, with the Jazz, with the Nuggets. I think that they feel confident going up against the Mavericks if they can get there. I think that they feel good about their first-round opponent, and the most important part for this rotation will just be cycling these guys in, getting them rest, and getting them in game shape.
It's not impossible that they could fall to number 7. They're 1.5 games ahead of the Mavericks. Now, they're currently in the 5 seed, the Thunder, the Mavericks in the 7, but it's only 1.5 games. They've all actually won the same amount of games, just that the Mavericks had 3 extra losses. So it's not inconceivable that they could drop down to 7. Would that be something they'd be looking to avoid and getting the Clippers in that first-round matchup?
Yeah, I think that you're absolutely trying to avoid drawing any team from LA. I think everyone in this postseason will look to do that in these seeding games. They're going to absolutely do everything they can to not get the Clippers. I think that that's their real goal in this, outside of getting guys in shape. I think that they just want to stay above that 7 line.
So let's talk about a couple of things that did happen with this team. Lou Dort, who'd been the starting small forward for the last month or so before the end of the season, he was converted from a 2-way deal. That always seemed a fait accompli, but that's official now. But the guy that used to hold that esteemed Oklahoma City Thunder 5th man in the rotation that never touches, in the same line that never touches the ball, Andre Roberson, is back. Terrence Ferguson, the placeholder in that spot, is also there. So, first of all, is Roberson going to play?
A lot of positivity around Andre Robertson right now. I think that this is the first time in this 2 years journey back to the NBA floor. For the first time, you're seeing the organization put public pressure on Andre to play. And pressure is not always a bad thing. They're not telling him to put up or shut up. They're just saying how excited they are for him to play. It's no longer Billy Donovan and at the time Russell Westbrook telling the media, hey, we're hoping he can get back. We're hoping everything goes right for him. They're telling the media, they're telling us, hey, he's ready to go. He looks good. He looks like his old self. Abdul Nader says he looks like he improved his jump shot. Shea says he looks like the smartest defender he's ever played with in his 2-year career going back to LA. He played with Patrick Beverley. So everything is pointing up for Andre to play. He doesn't have a knee brace. He's practiced the entire time in Orlando, which is rare for him to be a consistent participant in practice. And he's gone through the full contact. He looks good. The question, I think, is no longer will he play? It's how much he'll play.
Yeah, I think that you talk about the pressure coming from the organization, and I like the way that you phrase that, because for 2 years we literally heard nothing about this guy. Like, it was like, is this guy actually still on a roster? Is he still going to play basketball? What is going on? Because he's never heard anything about it. But now it feels like almost every second day there's something coming out about Andre Roberson, and it is a definite change in direction in terms of how they're messaging this. So that is a huge positive there. I would expect he at most plays 20 minutes through these warm-up games at most, and that's going to cut into guys like Hamidou Diallo, probably a little bit of Darius Bazley and Terrence Ferguson, who seems to, Rylan, have fallen out of favour a little bit with the Thunder.
Yeah, Terrence Ferguson has had a rough season. He's dealt with a lot off the floor, going through personal battles with his, with his ex-girlfriend and family issues like that. But on the floor, he just has not looked the part, and he's not looked like that first-round talent they thought he was. And whenever you have an undrafted guy like Lou Dort, and I hate to use that crush of undrafted because we both know that he was getting some first-round love, and then just on draft night something, took a turn for him, and he went undrafted. But he has the talent. He rose up and took Ferguson's spot, and now Ferguson gets strapped back again, as you mentioned, with Andre returning. His career has not panned out the way that he thought it would, the way that the Thunder thought it would. It seems like he's on his last stint here in Oklahoma City.
Outside of Robertson returning, this rotation seems relatively stable. We sort of know what we're going to get. We're going to get a lot of the three-guard lineup. We're going to get Schroeder playing 30 minutes off the bench, and Gilgeous-Alexander and Paul and Gallinari and Noel backing up Steven Adams. But let's talk about Adams for a little bit here, because his beginning of the season was a little bit disappointing. He wasn't playing his customary 30-plus minutes. He was like 29 and 9. Or yeah, he actually played 27 minutes a game. And was that just because of some of the injuries he suffered, or was it because of how well Nerlens Noel was doing in that backup role? Because it seemed to be more of a minutes split, not an exact 50-50, but Adams wasn't playing those bulk minutes he had in the past.
Yeah, I think that the way that Noel played, the way that he stepped up, gave the Thunder that benefit to allow Steven Adams to come back from those injuries and to allow Adams not to play that many minutes. I mean, you look at last year's team and the team prior to that with Paul George and Russ, and that team trying to go for it, that team feeling the pressure of trying to win. They didn't let Steven Adams recover from injuries. So the injuries lingered all season long, and then they came to a head in the postseason, and Adams was a shell of himself in each of the last two postseasons because of those injuries. And so allowing him to heal from a preseason injury throughout this regular season, thanks to Nerlens Noel, is a huge benefit. I don't think that he's in any danger of losing minutes to Noel or anything like that. I think it was, like you said, he's just recovering from an injury at the start of the year, and that's why the minutes were split. But credit to Noel for being good enough to allow a guy like Steven Adams to take less minutes and to recoup from that injury.
If I had to give you an over-under on the amount of these regular season games that Chris Paul plays, and I said it was 6.5, would you go over or under?
It might sound crazy, but I'm going to go over. Chris Paul has been telling us how excited he is to play and how hungry he is to play. And I obviously do not think that he'll play every minute of every game in these 8 seeding games. But I think that there's a rest day built in there against Washington because they're not going to have Bradley Beal. They're not going to have John Wall. They have not going to have Bertans. I think that that's a built-in rest day for guys like Paul and Gallo. But other than that, I think that he's going to be hungry and ready to fight because this team, it's not just coach speak. They're truly believing in each other and believing they can make a run. And I know to you and me, it sounds crazy, but within those walls, they are truly excited about what they can do in Orlando. And I think that Chris Paul will also feel the pressure, as we've mentioned, how drastically they can fall in the standings. He'll feel the pressure of not having Dennis Schroeder, who's going to leave the bubble soon for the birth of his second child. He's going to want to pick up that slack. He is so motivated to be with this team. And I can't understand it as a veteran. He's embraced a small market. He's embraced these young guys. That's not something that always happens. In fact, I can't think of a time it's happened before, but I think he plays in 7 or 8 games.
I've got him playing in 7 of the 8. I think there is a back-to-back in there that I think he might take off. Him and Gallinari might just rest that one, considering that they probably have their spot pretty secure at that stage. But you mentioned Schroeder and leaving the bubble. Do we have any idea when that's going to happen?
So he said 3 to 4 weeks, depending, of course, when the birth's going to come and when he needs to leave. But 3 to 4 weeks, that was a week ago. So we're looking at a couple weeks here. He's gonna be heading out. So
that's probably around the end of these 8 seeding games.
Yeah, if it's that 4-week mark, it'll be the first round of the postseason. He'll miss a couple games at least, if not the entire first round. If it is closer to that 3-week mark, he'll get back right at the end of the 8 seeding games.
So for those of you doing fantasy drafts, I think you can expect majority of those games played here for Schroeder, but of course that can change. But in terms of the Thunder's playoff chances, they've been using that lineup a lot, and without Schroeder there, that makes things really difficult because they don't really have another ball handler off the bench. That the rotation has to change completely to sort of stagger Shea and Chris Paul then, because you don't want Abdul Nadir or Hamidou Diallo coming off the bench and being your point guard. So you're going to have to change that quite a bit, and that's going to mean more minutes for Robertson and probably Ferguson and Dort in that situation as well. So how much of it, like Schroeder's been maligned in his career and he's had some the on-off stuff without Chris Paul this year is pretty rough, but just not having someone else there that then throws your entire rotation out of whack, that could be a bit of a problem for Oklahoma City.
Yeah, I think that without Dennis, they're not going to win. In a postseason series, they just don't have the horses at that ball handler position. You can try your best to stagger Shea and Paul the same way that Houston tried to do that with Paul and Harden, and then Lou Dort, who is a primary point guard in college, maybe he can step up and take some minutes at that lead ball handler role. But I don't feel comfortable with that either. And then their only other point guard is a two-way guy, Devin Hall, who they've liked within the organization for a long time, but he's just going to make this roster because of the substitution players. So there's no good answer without Dennis. And whenever you take away their best lineup, which is that 3-guard lineup, it puts them in a serious hole in the postseason.
One last question for you. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, second season, first in Oklahoma City, took a big step forward this season. We know he played 35 minutes a game. He averaged 19 points. His ball handling and assist numbers were down because, of course, playing alongside Chris Paul and Dennis Schroeder is going to do that to you. Do you see an extra gear here for Shai? Is he going to be someone that we're looking at as an extra breakout guy?
So I've been saying on Locked On Thunder that, he's taken this time. He told us with the media sessions that he didn't stop playing basketball. He's continued this entire layoff. And this layoff, as you know, has been longer than the last 3 off seasons. And I think that we could get a sneak peek of year 3 Shai. And we both know that in year 3, guys take that next step. Billy Donovan says he looks better. Chris Paul says he looks like a different person. And Donovan also noted that he looks stronger. So I think that we are going to be in for a breakout with Shai. And we haven't gotten much information in terms of on the court, videos on the court. But what little practice videos we do have, his jump shot specifically looks totally overhauled.
I think that's really important to mention about the off-season period and this break being like an off-season. Now he comes into basically his 3rd season. So that is absolutely something to watch. So let's see if Shai can take it up an extra level. And maybe we do see, if Schroeder misses time, we get more of that point guard level play out of Shai because, again, it has been marginalized a little bit this season playing alongside Paul and Schroeder. But all of the other Thunder news, Rylan will have that for us over on Locked On Thunder. Thanks for coming on Locked On Fantasy Basketball with me, Rylan.
Thanks for having me.
If you're looking to come in and fix your car, why would you go to a local auto repair store? Why don't you just go to rockauto.com? Because not only do they have a massive, massive range of parts, you go to your local store, they can't have anything that matches rockauto.com. Rockauto.com, you can sit at home, order the parts that you need for your car, and do it at a cheaper price. RockAuto.com, they don't have different prices for professionals and do-it-yourselfers. It is the same low price right across the board. And who doesn't love that? You've got plenty of time. If you're sitting at home, you're quarantined, you can't go outside, why don't you learn a skill, save some money, fix your car? And to do it, rockauto.com is the best place for you to find those parts. The catalog is unique and it's remarkably easy to navigate. You can quickly see all the parts available for your vehicle and choose the brand, specifications, and prices that you prefer. And when you go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck, write Locked On in their How Did You Hear About Us box so that they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. Now, let's talk about the Houston Rockets, and to talk about the Rockets, I am joined by the host of the Locked On Rockets podcast, Jackson Gatlin, is here with me. Jackson, welcome to the show.
Always a pleasure to do this show with you, Josh.
Now, Jackson, Houston currently sitting in the 6th seed, but the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, they're all really, really close in the Western Conference, even up to the 3rd seed with Denver. So, Houston, do they have any particular motivation to improve their seeding? Like, what's the idea here in these 8 restart games? What is D'Antoni and this team looking to achieve?
So, both D'Antoni and Harden have kind of vocalized that they're not worried about seeding. Through these 8 seeding games, they're not worried about what the playoff picture is really going to look like. I think and I feel like a lot of teams probably are leaning this way, is they're just looking to use these 8 games as kind of a way to tune themselves up before the playoffs, make sure things are right schematically in the offense and the defense, things of that nature. Now, are they going to go out there with the intention to lose these games? Absolutely not. They want to go out there. They want to get into a good rhythm before the playoffs start. And you definitely don't want to roll into the playoffs with a 1 or 2 or 3 game losing streak or something to that effect. So I don't think they necessarily are worried as much about the seeding and the implications there. I think they just view these 8 seeding games as a way to fine tune things before the playoffs, which, those are the games that actually matter.
So, Mike D'Antoni has always roundly been criticized for a really narrow rotation, big minutes, 8-man, 9-man, barely at times. Do you think that we'll see something different? Will we Will we be getting 38 minutes of James Harden? Will it be 33, 34? Will they be easing the load on PJ Tucker? Will we get an actual 10-man rotation from D'Antoni? Like, what's the idea here?
Well, I truly hope that they're not going to trot James Harden out for, 38, 40 plus minutes on a nightly basis for these 8 games. And based on everything that we've heard out of Mike D'Antoni throughout the training camp sessions since he's been in Orlando, that kind of thing, he plans to expand his roster, which means hopefully more minutes for guys like, Jeff Green, DeMarre Carroll. The one kind of X factor that we really still don't know about is Luka Mbamute, who a lot of Rockets fans, even some Rockets media, were very excited about that signing because he was such an impact player for that 2017-2018 team that posted a franchise best 65 wins. However, due to an injury at the tail end of that season, he just wasn't the same for that postseason. Following year, he goes to the Clippers, plays, doesn't even play any games because he just can't get his body right. And there was some mutual interest at the start of the season, but the Rockets and Mbamute just their respective camps just never figured anything out. And now that he's signed as the replacement player for Thabo Sefolosha, who opted not to join the team in Orlando for the restart of the season, he still hasn't joined the team. So now everybody's there in Orlando except for Luka Mbamute, and there's still no news, no timetable on when he's supposed to be joining the team. So I do worry a bit that, as excited as I was personally and many others about the signing and, what he might be able to bring to the table, I'm worried that because he's missed such a large portion of this training camp that he might not have the time to get back in and get acclimated to the system and everything. The one thing that he does have going for him is that he has played in the system before. He was here in 2017, 2018. He's familiar with Mike D'Antoni, with Harden, and that might play into his favor, even though he's missed a lot of this this prep work time, basically.
I wouldn't expect him to have been a huge part of the rotation anyway, especially when the playoffs arrive, maybe more of a spot guy. Maybe he could play some center behind PJ Tucker, but Jeff Green's in that role there, and I think, for a guy, Mbamute, who's barely played over the last 2 years and hasn't played at all this season, I think getting someone who's actually been playing and has a little bit of experience with this current iteration of the team might be a better way to go. So I'm not even sure he'd play that much of a role, but just an extra body, I guess, to throw out there to play small ball center, to play at the 4. Now, Russell Westbrook, we know, has contracted coronavirus. Where is he at? Is he in the bubble now?
Yeah, so he's currently in the bubble. He arrived, I want to say it was early Monday morning. Time has been a bit of a blur with everything
Yes.
going on. I feel like a lot of people can relate to that. But he did arrive in the bubble. In fact, the Rockets decided to take today off as we're recording this Tuesday, July 21st. There we go. The Rockets opted not to practice today in the hopes that they would have more practice time spent with Russell Westbrook on the court after he passes his 48-hour quarantine. So the hopes is that he will be joining the team for practice as early as Thursday is the ideal scenario.
Now, Westbrook has sat out back-to-backs all season, one of those games with his knee. Have we had any update on when the knee sits? The Rockets do have a back-to-back in this restart, and I would be absolutely stunned if he played both of those games. But do we have any update on where this knee sits? Has the 4 months off been useful for him?
We haven't actually heard anything regarding that about the back-to-backs. A lot of the most recent questions from Rockets media availabilities have been, rightfully so, directed, towards James Harden and about James Harden as he joined the bubble a bit later as well, citing, some personal family issues, which is what delayed his arrival in Orlando. Now, as far as Westbrook playing that back-to-back, it really is up to the Rockets medical staff. That's been a bit, there have been some questions about Westbrook and, kind of how hard they're going to hit the ground running once he is available. And Mike D'Antoni usually goes with the de facto, it's up to the medical staff. So kind of a bit of a cop-out answer at times. But so unfortunately, we don't have anything concrete to base on, whether or not he will play that back-to-back. But personally, I would be surprised if he didn't play that back-to-back, but I've been wrong before. So maybe don't quote me on that.
I think when we're looking at fantasy restart, if you are playing any of these leagues, I think Harden is the number one guy to grab. I think Westbrook's probably a top 10 player in that mold, and Covington probably is also close to a top 15, top 12 sort of a player there. But there is one spot in the lineup that's changed a little bit throughout the year, and that is the starting small forward position. Eric Gordon has had it at times. Daniel House has had it at times. Both of those guys have been up and down, Gordon particularly. Who do you think is going to start at that small forward spot, and who do you think is going to get the bulk of the minutes?
I would imagine that it will still be Daniel House Jr. Now, I will say that with a caveat that there has been a bit of talk that, there's some expectations resting on the shoulders of Daniel House to perform in that role as the starting small forward. And, I've been a part of some discussions both on social media as well as, over at Locked On Rockets, just kind of debating, what would happen if Daniel House Jr. gets the starting nod, in this restart, and just, 1, 2 games in, 3 games in, he's just underperforming or whatever. What happens then? Because you have Eric Gordon, who is now for the first time this year fully healthy. At least he says he is, knock on wood, that his knee is better now. And, we'll be able to see the Eric Gordon of old, because that has been sorely missed for this Rockets team so far this season. Now, does that mean Eric Gordon gets the nod? Because then you're running a very small lineup with not a lot of length if you're running your 3 guards out there in Russell Westbrook, James Harden, and Eric Gordon in your starting lineup. Another interesting possibility is the fact that maybe, just maybe, that if Daniel House Jr. doesn't pan out, that DeMarre Carroll might actually get some starting minutes, or possibly just, an increased role in this team, because he's a veteran presence, because, he's got a reliable 3-point shooting percentage. He's a guy that I was a little distraught at the fact that he wasn't getting more burn pre-hiatus. And I think now, with a formal training camp for 3 guys specifically to keep in mind, Robert Covington, who was acquired midseason, and Jeff Green and DeMarre Carroll, who were all signed, with about 10 games left in the season before the hiatus, it gives those 3 players a chance to really have a formal training camp, to get acclimated with the system, with the team, things that they wouldn't have been afforded during a regular season. So I'm hopeful that DeMarre Carroll will be a guy that can pick up some extra minutes. Even if House isn't, underperforming, I still think this team could really benefit from, that veteran defensive presence that DeMarre Carroll brings to the court.
I think DeMarre Carroll's cooked personally. He shot 26% from 3 this season. He was great a few years ago. He's been a steady decline. I think if they're going with him, then they are in some pretty significant trouble. That would be my look at it, because I think that you could throw Austin Rivers in there, who'd actually perform at a higher level. I'd even think that Mar Mute might actually provide better play than Carroll at this point. Unfortunately, he is 34 years of age and just hasn't knocked in the threes at all. Ben McLemore's another guy who's had minutes at that spot during the season. But I do think they'll go with House as well, who's been really strong as a defender and a shooter, and then Gordon gets those minutes off the bench with this team. There's been a bit of talk about how good Tyson Chandler's looked in practice, but if you pass through the words that Mike D'Antoni has said, it seems very unlikely that he's going to play. It's more like we use him to replicate other teams that actually use a center in our practices, and he's been great in that role, but I don't think that means that all of a sudden he's going to start getting playing time.
No, not at all whatsoever. If anything, I think, and having this conversation with Rockets broadcaster Craig Ackerman recently, if anything, you might see Tyson Chandler at the tail end of like a half, just maybe guarding an inbounds pass or something to that effect. But I think at this point, Tyson Chandler is, he's a veteran presence. He's a locker room presence. He's a guy that his defensive insight is probably invaluable inside that locker room. But as far as on the court production and actual, real-time game reps and minutes, he's probably not going to be getting anything.
I have to always mention these things because there are people who just don't ever buy the Rockets going centerless. It's like, oh, well, no, they've still got Tyson Chandler, or they still had Isaiah Hartenstein, or they still had, and well, now Hartenstein's gone. Like, they cannot buy into this mode anymore. Just the last remaining player that's taller than 6'6" on this roster is Tyson Chandler. And just had to get that out there that they're not going to be running him out there 26 minutes a night, because they are going to backtrack on their no center line. But they are not doing that. That is just not happening. And Chandler is there as an absolute emergency, or as D'Antoni has said, to be the guy that is our scout team center, so we can work against teams that actually have a big guy on the court.
Yeah, in fact, I was a lot of people were kind of scratching their heads at the thought of when Isaiah Hartenstein was waived to make room for the signing of David Nwaba, who isn't going to participate in the remainder of the season as he's rehabbing that Achilles tear, and is basically a future signing looking towards the future of small ball for next season. A lot of people were kind of scratching their heads. Well, why wouldn't you not have waived one of, say, Thabo Sefolosha, who at that point hadn't opted out for the remainder of the season? Or why wouldn't you waive Tyson Chandler, who may or may not even return next season, as he's, at his 19th year in the NBA and probably looking at retiring soon? And that actually made a great deal of sense to me, was the idea that Tyson does sort of replicate what other teams are possibly able to do as far as having traditional centers match up against small ball. And I had never considered that a possibility, that his presence in practice during those, 5-on-5 scrimmages and things to to that effect kind of benefit this team to give them a chance to see what it looks like to actually play against a more traditional lineup, as opposed to if they had gotten rid of Tyson and they were using, say, Isaiah Hartenstein in that role. He doesn't have anywhere near the defensive IQ or instincts that Tyson does. And so just in a practice environment, when you're trying to, replicate real game reps, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is what his role is going to be. And it's a very valuable role to be able to do that, to run your offensive schemes against a team that does have a center out there that is as good defensively and as strong as Tyson Chandler is. All of the upcoming Rockets news, Jackson, you're going to have for us over on Locked On Rockets. And thank you for coming on Locked On Fantasy with me.
Absolutely. Always a pleasure, Josh.
And that will do it for today's show, guys. Don't forget to subscribe, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and on YouTube. And give me a thumbs up on YouTube. Leave a comment down below and give it a rating over on Apple Podcasts. Guys, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.